The air in Mays County was thick with the scent of pine and impending rain. It was June 12, 1977, at 6 a.m. A camp counselor stepped out into the misty dawn of Camp Scott, Oklahoma, expecting the quiet chirp of birds. Instead, she found a silence so heavy it felt physical. Then she saw it. Not inside a tent, not tucked away in a corner, but out in the open. On a desolate trail leading to the showers, 3 sleeping bags lay like discarded cocoons. When she moved closer, the morning light hit the canvas, revealing a deep arterial crimson. The metallic tan of blood hung in the humid air, but it wasn't just on the bags. It was on the leaves of trees 6 feet high. It was on a locked trunk yards away. It was in the very place where innocence was supposed to be guarded. They found blood where it shouldn't have been, and the nightmare that followed would change the heart of America forever. To understand the horror, we must understand the sanctuary. Camp Scott was a sprawling 400-acre retreat nestled in the deep woods of Oklahoma. For decades, it was a place of merit badges, campfire songs, and the blossoming of young friendships. In the summer of 1977, 3 young girls, Lori Lee Farmer, 8, Michelle Hughes, 9, and Doris Denise Milner, 10, arrived with the excitement only a summer camp can provide. They were assigned to Tent 10 in the Kiowa unit. The Kiowa unit was the most remote, tucked furthest from the counselor's cabin, shrouded by thickets of oak and hickory. But there was an omen. 2 months before the season began, during a training session, a counselor found her belongings ransacked. Inside her donut box was a handwritten note. At the time, it was dismissed as a cruel joke, a prank by local teens. But as the sun rose over the Kiowa unit that June morning, the joke became a jagged, bloody reality. The girls in Tent 10 were not in their beds. They were found 150 yards away, brutally assaulted and strangled. The crime scene was a chaotic map of violence. Investigators were baffled by the distribution of the evidence. How could someone enter a tent shared by 3 girls, commit such a heinous act, and move the bodies such a distance without waking the entire camp? The night of the murder had been stormy. Thunder masked the screams, and heavy rain washed away the footprints that should have led straight to the killer. Inside Tent 10, the scene was chillingly clinical. There was no sign of a struggle. It was as if the girls had been beckoned out or taken in their sleep. But as the flashlight beams cut through the darkness of the surrounding woods, the horror expanded. They found a flashlight in the grass. It didn't belong to the camp. They found a roll of tape, a pair of glasses, and a set of footprints that led toward the river. The primary suspect soon emerged, Gene Leroy Hart, a local man, a convicted rapist who had escaped from prison 4 years earlier and had been living like a phantom in the caves and forests he knew since childhood. Hart was a member of the Cherokee Nation, and the hunt for him turned into a cultural flashpoint. For 10 months, he evaded one of the largest manhunts in Oklahoma history. He was a shadow in the trees, a whisper in the canyon. When he was finally captured in a small cabin deep in the Cookson Hills, the state thought they had their man. The evidence seemed insurmountable. Hairs found at the scene were consistent with Hart's. The tape used to bind the girls matched a roll found in a location he frequented. Yet, the trial was a masterpiece of doubt. The defense argued that the evidence had been planted, that the local authorities were desperate for a scapegoat to ease the public's mounting fury. In a shock that reverberated across the nation, Gene Leroy Hart was acquitted. He returned to prison only to serve the remainder of his previous sentence, where he dropped dead of a heart attack while exercising in the yard just months later. He took his secrets to the grave. But the blood that shouldn't have been there, remained a haunting puzzle. Decades later, DNA testing was conducted on the old evidence. The results were startling. While they didn't definitively point to Hart, they couldn't exclude him either. But they also suggested the presence of another, unidentified individual. Was there a second monster in the woods that night? Was Hart a participant, or was he framed by a much more calculated predator? The shadows of Camp Scott never truly lifted. The camp was closed immediately after the murders and never reopened. Today, the wooden frames of the tents have rotted away and the forest has reclaimed the Kiowa unit. But locals say that on stormy June nights, the air still grows cold, and the sound of the rain is interrupted by a silence that shouldn't exist. The Girl Scout murders remain one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in true crime history. It reminds us that even in the most protected spaces, the darkness is always waiting at the edge of the light. The blood found on the high leaves and the distant trail serves as a permanent mark of a night where evil walked unimpeded. Who was the man in the woods? Why 1010? And how did he move through the storm like a ghost? The answers are buried under 40 years of Oklahoma soil. Tonight, as you look into the dark corners of your own room, remember that some monsters do and hide under the bed. They wait in the places where you feel most safe. They leave marks where no one thinks to look. They leave blood where it shouldn't have been. As we close the vault on this chapter of horror, the question remains: if the DNA couldn't close the case and the suspect is dead, is justice even possible? Or is the truth simply something the earth refuses to give up? The legacy of the 1977 murders is a warning. It is a story of missed warnings, failed justice, and 3 families who never got to see their daughters grow up. Every time a new forensic technique is developed, the files are dusted off, but the trail has grown cold, and the witnesses have grown old. The mystery survives, feeding on our fear of the unknown. It is the ultimate what-if story. What if the note in the donut box had been taken seriously? What if the counselors had checked the Kiowa unit one more time before the storm hit? These questions provide no comfort to the dead. They only serve to remind us of our own vulnerability. The Midnight Crime Vault is a place for these lost stories, for the victims who deserve to be remembered, and for the killers who think they've gotten away with it. We will continue to dig, to search, and to shine a light into the blackest parts of human history. Because even when the blood is found where it shouldn't be, the truth is always out there, waiting to be found. The narrative of Mays County is written in the soil, in the jagged limestone of the caves, and in the memories of those who survived that summer. Consider the geography of the crime. The killer didn't just stumble upon Tent 10. He navigated through a labyrinth of dark trails, through a downpour that turned the ground into a treacherous sludge. He knew exactly where the counselors were sleeping. He knew the patrol schedules. He knew that 1010 was the furthest point from safety. This wasn't the act of a wandering drifter. It was the work of someone who understood the pulse of the camp. The items found at the scene, the red plastic flashlight, the specialized tape, spoke of preparation. This was a hunt. When investigators walked through the Kiowa unit in the days following the massacre, they felt a lingering presence. The woods seemed to watch them back. Every snapped twig was a potential clue. Every indentation in the mud a possible footprint. But the rain had been the killer's greatest ally. It washed away the microscopic world of evidence that modern forensics would have feasted upon. By the time the sun set on June 12th, the crime scene was already compromised by the very elements that had witnessed the act. The community of Locust Grove and the surrounding towns were paralyzed. Doors that had never been locked were bolted shut. Shotguns were cleaned and loaded. Parents who had sent their children to camp for a week of freedom now lived in a state of hypervigilance. The trust in the great outdoors was shattered. The Girl Scouts of the USA, an organization built on character and safety, faced an existential crisis. If 3 girls could be taken from their tents in the middle of a sanctioned camp, was any child anywhere truly safe? The psychological impact of the blood found on those high leaves cannot be overstated. It suggested a level of physical exertion and violence that defied the limitations of a single man. It suggested that the struggle was not just brief but explosive. How do you lift a body or a weapon in such a way that blood spatters onto the canopy of the forest? This detail haunted the medical examiners. It suggested a predator of immense strength or a frenzy that surpassed human comprehension. The trial of Jean Leroy Hart was a media circus that divided the state. On one side, the grieving families and the prosecution, convinced that the escaped convict was the only logical culprit. On the other, the local Cherokee community and civil rights activists who saw a long history of institutional bias being leveled against a man who had no means to defend himself. The courtroom became a theater of the macabre. They brought in the physical evidence, the stained sleeping bags, the flashlight, the tape. They brought in the experts who spoke of hair follicles and blood types, but the defense was brilliant. They poked holes in the chain of custody. They questioned the integrity of the sheriff's department. They painted a picture of a botched investigation where the authorities decided on the killer before they had the proof. When the not guilty verdict was read, the courtroom fell into a deathly silence. It was a verdict that satisfied the law but left the souls of the victims in a state of permanent unrest. The Farmer, Hughes, and Milner families were left with a void that no legal proceeding could fill. They had lived through the unthinkable, only to find that the system had no answers for them. The death of Hart in prison shortly after his acquittal only added to the mystery. Some saw it as divine justice. Others saw it as the final door closing on the truth. If he was the killer, he died without a confession. If he was innocent, the real murderer died or lived on without ever facing a judge. In the years that followed, the site of Camp Scott became a place of dark pilgrimage. Urban legends began to swirl. Some claimed to see the glow of a red flashlight moving through the trees. Others spoke of the magic man, a boogeyman figure that the girls had whispered about in the weeks leading up to the murders. The legend grew, fueled by the lack of closure. The site became a monument to a collective trauma. Even now, the coordinates of 1010 are etched into the minds of true crime enthusiasts and investigators alike. The case remains open in the hearts of the people of Oklahoma. Every few years, a new lead surfaces. A deathbed confession, a forgotten piece of evidence in an attic, a new DNA profile. But each lead evaporates into the same mist that covered the camp that fateful morning. The silence of the woods is absolute. The tragedy of the Girl Scout murders is not just in the loss of life, but in the loss of peace. It stands as a grim reminder that some crimes are so dark, so inexplicable, that they stain the very ground where they occur. The blood found where it shouldn't have been was just the beginning. The real horror is that it stays there, invisible but felt, a permanent shadow over the legacy of Camp Scott. We must look closer at the evidence that was ignored. The magic man wasn't just a story. Campers had reported a man watching them from the woods for days. They described him as a shadow that moved when they looked, a presence that felt heavy and cold. Why were these reports not taken seriously? Why was the security of the Kiowa unit not reinforced after the threatening note was found in April? These are the failures that scream from the past. A professional predator doesn't just strike. He stalks. He learns the terrain. He learns the weaknesses of his prey. The killer of 1010 was a master of the environment. He used the storm as a tool, the darkness as a cloak, and the isolation of the girls as his opportunity. He was a creature of the night, and he returned to the night once his work was done. As we look back through the lens of history, we see a case that was doomed from the start. A compromised crime scene, a controversial suspect, and a community blinded by fear and prejudice. But beneath the noise of the trial and the media, there are 3 young girls who never came home. Their stories were cut short in a place where they should have been writing the first chapters of their lives. The Midnight Crime Vault honors their memory by refusing to let the mystery die. We look at the blood on the leaves not as a horror, but as a silent witness. It tells a story of a struggle that we can only imagine. It tells of a night where the world went wrong. And as we continue to explore these dark corridors of human behavior, we must ask ourselves, how many other Camp Scotts are out there? How many other warnings are being ignored? The truth is a fragile thing, easily lost in the rain and the mud. But it is the only thing that can bring peace to the restless spirits of Mays County. Tonight, as the wind whistles through the trees outside your window, think of the Kiowa unit. Think of the 3 girls who stepped into the woods with dreams of badges and campfires, only to find a nightmare. The vault remains open because the truth is still hiding in the shadows. We will not stop looking. We will not stop asking. Because the blood found where it should have been demands an answer that has been 40 years in the making. The echoes of that morning in 1977 still resonate today, a chilling frequency that reminds us of the fragility of safety. If you've stayed with us this far into the darkness, you understand that these stories are more than just entertainment. They are a search for justice in a world that often denies it. They are a way to keep the flame of memory alive for those who can no longer speak for themselves. The Midnight Crime Vault is committed to bringing you the most detailed, most atmospheric, and most haunting accounts of true crime from around the globe. But we can't do it alone. Your engagement, your theories, and your passion for the truth are what drive this channel forward. Thank you for being a part of this community. Thank you for seeking the truth with us. If this deep dive into the Camp Scott mystery has moved you, please consider subscribing to the Midnight Crime Vault. By joining our community, you ensure that these stories continue to be told with the depth and respect they deserve. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a journey into the heart of a mystery. And now I leave you with one final thought. In a case where the evidence was washed away by the rain and the prime suspect was acquitted by a jury, who do you believe held the red flashlight in the Oklahoma woods? Was it a man the law couldn't catch, or a monster the world refused to see? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation and the search for the truth alive. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and we will see you next time in the Midnight Crime Vault. Good night.